Africa is invited to many summits throughout the world. Every handshake, every photo op about partnership, respect, and win-win cooperation. But let me ask the question that no one asks at these meetings. What technology has never been offered? Russia will sell Africa nuclear reactors. China will build railways, ports, and power plants. The West will lecture Africa endlessly about responsibility. But not one of them, not once, has handed Africa the blueprints for a modern high-speed gas centrifuge. Not the rotor tolerances, not the cascade mathematics, not the control software. And that's not an accident, because the moment Africa can enrich its own uranium, the global power hierarchy doesn't just shift, it breaks. And if you leave this video early, you'll miss the part where it becomes clear why this technology was never meant to reach Africa and who made sure of it. And as always, if you want more Africa First stories that Western media ignores, hit subscribe. We don't chase the headlines, we chase the truth. By the end of this video, you'll understand why Africa was allowed to rent power, but never design it. Don't call me your partner while hiding the engine keys. If anyone wanted a sovereign Africa, they'd stop giving us fish and work with us on the physics.
You might have heard something on the uranium enrichment program in Iran and the centrifuges. So let me just put some of that in context in case you were wondering what's going on. So uranium, one of the elements on the famed periodic table, it has 92 protons in it. And the number of protons in an element defines the element. Uranium is traditionally considered the heaviest natural element. We look around the universe, do we see anything heavier than that? No, not.
So this is Neil deGrasse Tyson. He's an astrophysicist, author, and science communicator. He holds degrees from Harvard University, the University of Texas at Austin, and Columbia University. He's going to explain why centrifuges are such a big deal for uranium enrichment and more.
Not really. We, however, are not content with what nature gives us. We want more. So in particle accelerators, we bombard the nuclei of elements and we can make heavier elements than uranium. And we've done so. Last I checked, we're up to 118. That's 26 more elements than the universe gave us. So frankly, I think that's badass for humans with our primate brain, being able to come up with that kind of advance on something birthed in the universe. Anyhow, when you find uranium in nature, typically it's a uranium ore, it comes in completely mixed in 3 varieties. There's uranium 234, uranium 235, and uranium 238. Oh, by the way, these versions of uranium are called isotopes. Anytime you vary the number of neutrons in an atom, it's an isotope. They all have 92 protons, but all the rest of that number comes from neutrons. It's got way more than 92 neutrons. Oh my gosh. They're crammed into the nucleus. So many of these big elements are unstable for that reason. Okay, there's a lot going on in the nucleus, and the nucleus wants to spontaneously break apart into lighter elements. Neutrons, by the way, go wherever they want. If you were a proton, there's only so close you can get to the nucleus because the nucleus is positively charged and you're positively charged. You'll repel. So neutrons, since they are neutral, they are offered no resistance walking straight into the nucleus of atoms. So here is uranium 235 and it's hit by a neutron. What happens is the nucleus splits into 2 parts, 2 lighter atoms. If you measure the mass of those 2 lighter atoms, it is less than the mass of the original 235. Where did the mass go? Ask Albert. Hey, Einstein, where did the mass go? E equals mc squared. Energy is the mass times the speed of light squared, which is just a constant in that equation. So energy and mass are equivalent. And if you lose mass, you gain energy for having done so. Anything that's radioactive emits energy. So that's not what's interesting about uranium-235. If you split it, the splitting creates 2 or more new neutrons. If I have a collection of uranium-235 atoms and I split one of them with a neutron, 2 neutrons pop out the other side, they hit 2 other atoms, now we're up to 4, then 8, then 16. This doubles fast. And you get what we named back at the birth of atomic energy, a chain reaction. And each one of those reactions releases energy. And given the kind of thinking that goes on in warfare, this wasn't simply a physics experiment that you write up in the journal. It was immediately weaponized to create a bomb. So it turns out uranium-234 doesn't behave. You can split it, but it doesn't shoot out extra neutrons on the other side. So you'll get the energy from splitting one of them, but you're not going to create a chain reaction. Same problem with uranium-238. It's only the 235 that has this property. If you get enough uranium in one place at the same time and start the reaction, you light the fuse. If you want to make a bomb, you want to isolate the uranium-235 from the uranium-234 and 238. Most of the uranium ore is uranium-238. Not useful for you. About no more than 1% of the uranium that is mined is uranium-235. So you want to enrich that. You want just the uranium-235. Well, how are you going to do it? These atoms are mixed together completely. How are you going to pull out the one that's in between the other two? Use a centrifuge. Well, centrifuges don't work on solid matter. You have to turn the matter into a fluid. It's a homogeneous substance that takes the shape of its container. So liquid is fluid, so is gas. The study in physics of fluid dynamics is the study of objects moving through gas and liquid. The same formulas apply in both cases. Back to uranium. One way to do this is to turn it into a liquid, but it turns out it's easier to turn it into a gas. Once you gasify the uranium, you now centrifuge it. You spin it. The centrifugal forces will separate out the U-238 from the U-234, leaving the U-235 in between those two. So these centrifuges are complex bits of engineering to siphon out the uranium-235 in between the 234 and 238. Now, if you pull it out when it's enriched by 5%, that would mean what you've pulled out is 5% uranium-235. That's good enough for nuclear power plants. Sure. Want to make energy from fission? Go right ahead. Up the purity to 20% or more? That's enough to power sort of nuclear propulsion in, for example, nuclear submarines for the Navy. And the value of that is it can stay underwater for much longer periods of time before refueling. But to make a bomb, it has to be so purified that at least 90% of the uranium that's extracted is composed of uranium-235. So it all depends on your goal. We don't think of just living on Earth as a centrifuge, but in a way it is. On Earth, you live in a centrifuge of 1G. That's why your Italian salad dressing settles out, okay? The denser material goes to the bottom, the lighter goes to the top. That would be the vinegar, which is denser than the oil. You just centrifuged it by just setting it down in Earth's gravity at 1G. If it was 2...
All right, so let's be honest. In 2026, Russia and China are not enemies of Africa, right? They build real infrastructure. They move quickly. They don't moralize like Bretton Woods institutions. But geopolitics has a rule that it never breaks. No power voluntarily gives away strategic technology. Every nuclear deal Africa signs follows the same architecture. The reactor is foreign. The fuel is foreign. The maintenance is foreign. The intellectual property is foreign. Africa gets electricity, not autonomy. So it's like someone helping you build a car, but insisting on driving you everywhere. You're moving, yeah, but you're never actually in control. And that's not partnership, that's dependency with a smile. So people think this means, or what they're told is Africa chose peace, that Africa rejected nuclear capability out of moral leadership, that the restraint was voluntary. But let's talk about what actually happened, right? Africa was never offered the core technology that defines nuclear sovereignty: modern high-speed gas centrifuge enrichment. So reactors were offered, fuel contracts have been offered, training is offered, but the blueprints, nah, they were not. Sovereignty isn't electricity. Sovereignty is design authority. So let's be precise, right? Because as always, the facts matter. So under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, African countries are legally allowed to enrich uranium for peaceful purposes under international safeguards: civilian nuclear power, research reactors, medical isotopes. So this is not a story about, illegality. It's a story about how far permission actually goes and where it stops quietly, right? So Africa didn't give up the keys. The locks were installed before the house was finished. So here's the part that no one's debating, right? No African country today possesses blueprints for modern high-speed gas centrifuges. Got it? Not South Africa, not Egypt, not Namibia, not Nigeria. But why? Because, no nuclear power has ever shared them. We could say that. But here's a harder truth, right? And we must own this, right, as Africans. Africa has not built them, right? Not because we lack intelligence or scientists or because it's technically illegal, which it isn't, right? But because of, for decades, African states were steered, sometimes pressured, sometimes persuaded toward consumption over construction, towards purchase over patience, and toward short-term electricity instead of long-term capability, right? Elite powers have guarded the blueprints, but Africa has accepted the contracts, and that matters. Every country that now possesses centrifuge technology reached that point the same way. Sustained indigenous research, right? Protected scientific institutions, political willingness to endure pressure, decades of investment without guarantees. In Africa, fragmented by debt cycles, regime instability, and externally designed development models, has rarely been committed to that path at scale. So we have to be precise and honest at the same time. Yes, Africa was excluded, but Africa also deferred. The door was guarded, but Africa often chose the shortcut instead of, rebuilding the house. So that isn't shame. It was a strategy, we'll say. But we also have to understand the educational ceiling. So African countries can and do train nuclear engineers domestically. Universities across the continent teach nuclear physics, reactor science, radiation safety, and power plant operations. But when training moves beyond operation into advanced enrichment science, the path changes. To access that level, African students must go abroad into tightly controlled programs under strict export control environments. And even there, the ceilings appear. So rotor fabrication is restricted. Cascade modeling is restricted. Enrichment software is restricted. So the issue is not education. The issue is where independent design begins and where permission ends. So Africa and Africans are trained to operate the system, but not licensed to originate them. And this is how dependency reproduces itself quietly without, saying the word. So we can't say that Africa was ever robbed of centrifuge blueprints, but we were never invited to have them, and no one's going to hand them over, which leaves the only path history has ever shown to work: indigenous research, continental science investment, long timelines, political resistance, and we're capable, right? And here's what matters going forward. These limits don't accidentally appear. You know, they were later codified, formalized, and locked in through treaties presented as moral leadership, right? And in the next episode, we're going to talk about Pelindaba, right? So how Africa became the only inhabited continent without nuclear weapons, right? How that status was sold as peace, and how restrictions on capability were turned into permanent policy, not as history, but as design. So, mashallah, that's your African insight for today. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, because I'm Mr.EmpowerTV. We don't chase the headlines, we chase the truth behind them. This is Mr. Empower, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.